this was a task given to us by the European Commission to develop an instrument, a kind of questionnaire to monitor human rights and health care in psychiatric and social care institutions. So this was a project which was jointly done by 15 countries in 13 languages, and we set up a set of questions which have to be asked and answered about participation in treatment decisions or compulsory admission or the right of correspondence and the communication. So we have a set of 30 topics developed in there which could be used for monitoring human rights in psychiatric and social care institutions.
What surprised you the most? What has surprised you the most in your findings?
No, these are not yet findings. This has been a development which we had 700 questions when we started, because users participated, service users participated in design of the project in focus groups. So in the beginning we had some 700 questions which should be asked, but this is not practical. So we had to come down to roughly 30 big topics that it can be used also. And we want that member states get this and they established mechanisms of how to use it.
Okay. But when the countries are very different. You mentioned some questions that were relevant in some countries but not in others. Try to mention one of these questions, for instance, heating.
Of course, there are questions about some very basic needs like heating or electricity, and there are hospitals or so-called hospitals in some countries where they don't have this even. So these type of questions had to be included. Of course, this sounds ridiculous for someone who is living in the Netherlands or in France. There's always electricity in hospitals, but it had to cover a really broad range. Or another question was whether persons are allowed to vote or even to marry when they are in an institution, because in some countries they don't have this right. And so it had to be very broad, from very subtle things like checking how is medication used? Is it really used for therapeutic purposes, or is it used as punishment, for example? It's very difficult to decide, of course, but these are rather subtle and difficult issues than electricity or heating.
Why is this kind of question as important at a European level?
We have to raise standards of human rights, and the questionnaire is important because it brings down the issue to concrete points. So if you want to check something, you shouldn't just say yes, the life in an institution has to follow human rights, but you have to pick out everything, every single issue, because it's getting so easily lost if you don't have a checklist. Like when a pilot starts, yes, his plane, he has to go through a checklist in order not to forget anything. And that it is also for institutions that you have now a checklist which you have to run through when you are monitoring this institution, so you don't forget single issues.
Well, what human rights do you think is of the utmost importance? What human rights are the most important, do you think?
I mean, of course, the issue is freedom. Freedom of choice, of treatment, freedom to behave like a normal citizen. And this is often taken away if you are put away in a large institution, for example. So I think the basic thing is to be free to act like others can act, unless, of course, you have committed a crime or so, then something happens in terms of legal procedures for everyone, not only for persons with mental disorders.